Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. This is for Friday, September 13th, 2024. I think I forgot to actually say the date last week. I forgot a lot of things last week, so tack that one up to my 70th birthday being this week. Translation old age, so getting a little long in the tooth here. But at any rate,
Wait. This week?
not this week, this month. Did I say
Oh, okay.
week?
Okay. Yeah, I knew that, but I wasn't. You threw me off about the week.
No, if I said week, I misspoke. It's this month.
Well, I could have misheard.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so um, uh, there were some things that I had wanted to talk about last week and didn't get said because I essentially completely forgot about them. We have talked in the past about how evolution has prepared the individual human to react to frightening situations or to fear. And we have made this a spiritual thing by pointing out that God's perfect love casts out fear. Fear triggers various reactions that include shutting down the rational brain. The rational brain takes too long to figure out what to do about a situation. So, evolution, not creation, has prepared us with his mechanism that when fright triggers us, the rational brain gets shut down, only the emotional limbic brain is in operation because it responds faster. And then people fall into essentially one of three categories of response to a frightening situation. And we sometimes use the terminology fight, flight, freeze. So, if a person's natural reaction to a frightening situation is fight, and I'm thinking now in terms of how these people interface with our law enforcement organizations, people whose reaction is to fight, well, they end up with disturbing the peace, assault, domestic violence, those kinds of charges because they get triggered, the rational brain shuts off, they aren't thinking right anymore, and they fight. They lash out, often physically. And that leads to these disturbing the peace, domestic violence, assault charges, whatever they are, and the severity of the charge will depend on the severity of the harm that they cause in their fight reaction. Now, then there's the flight reaction. And these, we believe anyway, are related to humans' interactions with predators who would kill humans, lions, tigers, bears, and so forth, animals that would kill humans for food. And so we develop these reactions to save ourselves from these threats. Well, if there's something coming after you, you can try to fight it off. Granted, if you don't have the kind of claws and teeth that the bear or the tiger have, it might be a little rough, but you can try to fight it off. You can try to run away. Again, if your predator is something like one of the cats, uh, generally that's not going to help a whole lot. And then the third reaction is to freeze. That's what the possum does. And there are other animals that do the same thing. A lot of predators will only eat what they have killed. So if you can fool them into thinking you're already dead, they'll leave you alone. At least that's what we think is going on with the reaction of the possum. So you've got fight, flight, and freeze. Now we've already talked about the fight when it comes to interacting with law enforcement, because while we try to teach people to respect and to trust law enforcement, certain people don't, based on past experience. Maybe they've been on the wrong side of the law from a very young age. So when they see a cop, it's like, well, he's after me. He's going to put me in jail. So now they've got that fright reaction, and then it's fight, flight, or freeze. Well, if the reaction is flight, and they happen to be in a vehicle, then we have the phenomenon known as a high-speed chase, because they try to run in their vehicle, and the police have powerful high-speed vehicles, and they try to chase them down. So you have that phenomenon. Well, what happens to the person whose natural reaction is to freeze? Well, in terms of their interaction with law enforcement, that is generally the best reaction, because in our country anyway, you do have the right to remain silent. So if your reaction is to freeze, you don't say anything. Well, at least you haven't incriminated yourself. They take you in, you go into custody, and the case is dealt with from there. And at some point after you are in custody, your rational brain has an opportunity to catch up with things and put you in a much better frame with law enforcement to deal with your situation. So, but there are people, obviously, who have not had the problems in childhood and who therefore don't have the same fright reaction when they encounter law enforcement. Yeah, you're upset when you see those party lights behind you because it's likely going to cost you something, but other than that, you don't react out of fear, and generally your rational brain is able to kick in and say, hey, pull over, take your licks, and move on. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've been pulled over and not gotten a ticket. I went through a spell there when I was driving a 1974 Dodge van with a flower painted on the sign that the cops would pull me over essentially just for driving the thing. In fact, I took it through Canada a couple of times, and every time I took that vehicle through Canada, they would stop and search my vehicle and run my identity before they'd let me into the country. I guess it was just something about that van and the look of it that made them want to check more carefully. And I did get pulled over a lot in it. I know one time I got pulled over, and I asked the officer how fast I was going. He wouldn't tell me. He said they were looking for a van that looked like mine, but mine wasn't it. Well, in that case, why'd he even bother to pull me over? But, he did. I got pulled over once because I was weaving around a little bit while I was messing with the radio. Again, and I got pulled over once in this state, late at night, headed north, and it was really bad weather. In fact, I think there was some freezing rain involved, but it was possible that the highways were going to be really slick. And in this case, I was on the interstate, and there's a curve at a particular point in the interstate that's kind of tight. And so I was carefully driving through that curve, but I was checking the traction I had to get a feel for how fast I could go. Well, I'm zipping around relatively fast for conditions, that curve, and I pass a car, and as I pass it, I discover that it's a state trooper. And he lit me up. Well, I wasn't speeding. In fact, I probably wasn't even going the speed limit. It's just how fast it was compared to the conditions. and he judged that I was not being careful enough given the conditions. And I didn't argue with him. I heard what he had to say. He told me that they had some accidents up at a river bridge not far ahead. And so I thanked him. And I used that information to take an exit before the river bridge and go around the backup on the interstate and get where I was going quicker. So it turned out to be kind of helpful. And so, how did I get off into that? I guess because I was talking about fight, flight, freeze, right?
Yeah, but I'm wondering how you got off on that from Perfect Love Cast Out All Fear, and I hope you will give me a chance to tell my take on that text.
All right. Go ahead.
Now?
Yes.
Well, for a long time, that text bothered me because I have a lot of fear that I have to deal with. And it makes me feel like I don't have perfect love. Well, duh, I don't. It occurred to me, no, I don't have perfect love because as a human on this planet, I have never experienced perfect love.
Yeah.
And I cannot have what I have never experienced. But who is, if you think of perfect love as an entity, a person, who is perfect love? God is perfect love.
Yes.
And God casts out fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, if you lived in an environment where everybody around you had perfect love, you would have nothing to
You
fear.
be afraid.
Right. When you relate with God and you understand God as we understand Him, then you understand that He is perfect love. And oh, I wish this thing wouldn't do that. Bible Gateway has started putting up audio ads. It's aggravating, but all I do is I just mute the computer, and that way we don't hear it. Where were we when I got interrupted?
We're talking about perfect love.
Right. In our relationship with God, we can expunge fear if we will believe the truth that God is love, He is good, He does not destroy, etc., etc.
And we don't need to fear God.
No. There's no cause for it. We need to fear ourselves sometimes. Or as Roosevelt, which Roosevelt? Franklin Roosevelt said at the onset of World War II, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that's interesting in the context because fear would drive the people of the United States to put Japanese Americans in internment camps for fear that they might side with their mother country. We didn't do that to Germans, just to the Japanese. So, yeah, what he said was perhaps a bit prophetic in that case, that the only thing that will cause us a problem in this situation is if we're afraid, because that will make us do bad things. But anyway. Programming note, we do have a sermon presentation ready. I didn't mention that last week. Sometimes I will mention it a week in advance. But we do have a sermon presentation ready to present tomorrow. And we'll try to have that recorded and available on the group at 11 a.m. Central Time tomorrow. Anything else, or can we go ahead and
Are
get
you
started?
going to do that live by any chance?
I'm going to try not to because of our bad luck with internet connections. You know, we'll go all week long and not have any internet outages. And as soon as we try to stream something live, poof, our connection will go out on us.
Well, I'm thinking at about 11 o'clock tomorrow, judging by this past week. You're not going to be aware of what's going on.
Well, I'm not now. I should be asleep still.
Yeah.
Yesterday at this time, I was zonked out sound asleep. That's, my messed up sleep schedule keeps rotating around, and this week it happened to be there. As it is right now, I've been up since like 9 or 9:30. So probably as soon as we get done with this, I'll crawl in bed and sack out and be gone for 3 or 4 hours. Well, anyway, we are about to start at Exodus chapter 36. That means there are like 5 more chapters in this book. We've recently been doing about 3 chapters every week. Don't know if we'll do that tonight, but we'll find out. So let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for the week that has passed and for the trials and triumphs of the week. We thank you that you are who you are and that we can trust you and that we can know that when we're with you, we do not need to be afraid. Help us to allay our fears and to come to know you better. As we open the written word now, we want the Holy Spirit to be present with each person so that we can understand more clearly and accurately just who you are and what you're all about, so that we might then, through that Spirit, be transformed into that image ourselves. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, here it is, Exodus chapter 36 in the New Living Translation. And it starts out saying, "The Lord has gifted Bezalel, Aholiab, and the other skilled craftsmen with wisdom and ability to perform any task involved in building the sanctuary. Let them construct and furnish the tabernacle just as the Lord has commanded." Now, this is all taking place apparently with the company, with the Israelites, near the mountain of God, Mount Horeb. We sometimes call it Mount Sinai, but the Sinai name has been attached to the peninsula between the arms of the Red Sea that is part of Egypt. But we think if it's part of Egypt now, it was probably part of Egypt then. So Israel would not have been safe there. They would really have needed to cross over farther away. And there are candidates for the mountain of God in modern Saudi Arabia that seem to be more appropriate than the mountain that we call Mount Sinai. And of course, during the medieval era, the church put up monasteries and temples and so forth around that location because that's where they thought it was. And that possible misunderstanding has come on to our day. And generally, translators render it Sinai when in fact the Hebrew calls it Horeb, the mountain of God, and Sinai is just a more modern rendering of what we think it is. At any rate, we're probably still there because Moses has gone to the mountain and received the tablets, and then he's broken those tablets, and he has been ordered to cut out another set of stone tablets and bring it up the mountain for God to write the covenant on it, or on them. And the description we have is that the tablets were inscribed on both sides. Normally, when you see monuments, they show all the writing on one side of the tablets, when in fact the the narrative, the text, is quite explicit that the writing was done on both sides. But at any rate, just little things. They're not that important, but there's a lot of little mistakes that get in and they become part of tradition, and then pretty soon everybody thinks the tradition is true and the text must be wrong because it doesn't match the tradition. At any rate, since that's the case, and because it seems to be that while Moses is in the mountain, or on the mountain, that he gets these instructions, that all of this is taking place while they're at that location, and that in fact for perhaps up to a year the people didn't move at all. They camped right there next to the mountain of God, or Mount Horeb. Reading on then, so Moses summoned Bezalel and Aholiab and all the others who were specially gifted by the Lord and were eager to get to work. Moses gave them the materials donated by the people of Israel as sacred offerings for the completion of the sanctuary. But the people continued to bring additional gifts each morning. Finally, the craftsmen who were working on the sanctuary left their work. They went to Moses and reported, "The people have given more than enough materials to complete the job the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave the command, and this message was sent throughout the camp. "Men and women, don't prepare any more gifts for the sanctuary. We have enough." So the people stopped bringing their sacred offerings. Their contributions were more than enough to complete the whole project. And modern church building campaigns read this passage, these two verses, with exceptional envy, because I'm not aware, maybe in rare instances, of any church building projects which had to tell the people to quit donating because they already had enough money to finish the building. That's what happened here. And we could sit here and speculate about why that is. Why were they so willing to donate? Well, one reason probably is they weren't used to having that kind of wealth. They'd been slaves for generations. They got all this wealth as they left Egypt, as they did what God commanded through Moses, to go to the Egyptians and ask them for articles of gold and silver and so forth, essentially to get their pay for all the years that they had worked as slaves. So they had all this, and that may help to explain their willingness to give. There may have been a sense of national identity and excitement over this new national identity that led them to give so generously. And it suggests perhaps that the failure of the golden calf was not as severe and far-reaching a failure as we sometimes make it out to be. Yes, it was a failure. Yes, they broke one of the commandments in that covenant of the 10 commandments that God had given them. Yes, it involved some things they probably shouldn't have been involved in. And yes, Moses' reaction was a bit of a problem. And we didn't talk about this last week when we covered what God said to Moses there afterwards. And we didn't really get into it in a lot of detail. But God says, well, Moses, look, these people are stubborn and stiff-necked. There's nothing I can do with them. How about I just wipe them out and then I'll let you be the father of my chosen people. I don't know that we really talked about it much, but we don't believe that God really intended to do that. That was a test for Moses. Well, why would God test Moses? Well, we have the example in the rap story in the book of Job, particularly the part at the beginning where God has this meeting in heaven and the sons of God appear before him and Satan shows up. The accuser shows up. And God says, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, well, I've come from walking to and fro on the earth." As if he's saying, "I'm here to represent earth." And we have talked in the past about how ownership of this planet was one of the issues in the whole great controversy thing, that Satan wanted to claim this planet as his own, and we see hints at that in the language as we look at the Hebrew in Genesis chapter 1 and what it's saying. And it tells us that the earth was tohu wabohu, and yet we find elsewhere in the Old Testament that God did not create this earth tohu. Well, then we have to ask ourselves, how did it get that way? But anyway, we've talked about that before. So we see that in the book of Job, and Job ends up having to suffer through a pretty severe test because of the accusations laid out by Satan, which is Hebrew for the accuser. The accuser was accusing not only Job, but also God. Job's not really an honest man. Job's not really devoted to his Creator. He just worships God because God's good to him. And God is not really the loving individual he says he is. He's buying devotion from his people by being good to them. And he says, "All right, God, here's a challenge. Strike him down. See if he still worships you." And of course, then we have all that. So, if God presents a test to Moses, would it not make sense that the accuser was engaging in some of this accusatory work regarding Moses? And maybe we can imagine it this way. Satan shows up in the heavenly councils and he says, "Look at what's going on down there. These people make a golden calf and break your rules." And Moses throws a hissy fit and he throws down those sacred stones, and then he grinds this thing up, makes the people drink the contaminated water, and then he sends people out and kills 3,000 of them. Not a very good representation of God, was it? Moses was human, and he did have failures, and I think we might be able to interpret what he did as a result of the golden calf as a failure and not what God wanted him to do. And
However,
the placement of the test right after those events suggests that the accuser may well have been taking advantage of that failure to accuse Moses before God. So God had to make a demonstration that, yes, Moses got triggered, his limbic brain may have taken over, he may have done some things that weren't right, but let's get him in a different situation and let's see if he'll go along with my proposal to destroy these people and become the father of God's chosen people. And he passed that test. You were going to say something.
It wasn't for God that Moses or Job had to be tested
No,
because God knew without the test.
right. It was for all the other intelligences in the universe that are hearing these accusations that are being made publicly. So, here we are just, a month or two after the whole golden calf event, and the people are bringing in so many gifts that Moses has to say, "We've got enough. Please stop bringing them." Reading on. The skilled craftsman made 10 curtains of finely woven linen for the tabernacle. Then Bezalel, what'd you say?
What does that say for prosperity preachers? It's your money.
Well, if they have to beg for it, it's not being very freely given, is it?
Moses said, we don't need any more, stop giving. And these prosperity preachers are out there, even not just prosperity, but these preachers are out there. Send us your money, give us your money, give.
Yeah, and a lot of them have
And
more.
when they use tithe, they teach tithe in a way that the Bible does not teach tithe, and use it to misrepresent God and scare you into
bigger
giving
donations.
money for reasons that are selfish.
Yeah. Like I was going to say, a lot of these preachers have more than enough. They should be, like Moses, issuing the command, stop giving. There's a footnote there. We were reading verse 8, and it footnoted the name Bezalel, Hebrew he, and also in 36, 16, 20, 35, and also see 37, chapter 37, verse 1. So they're giving a name here instead of just saying he, as the Hebrew says. And you'll find that it is frequent in the ancient languages for the antecedent to a pronoun not to be clear. The writers expected their readers to understand who they were talking about just based on the general context and what's being said and what's being done, to know who they talk about, and they use pronouns without making the antecedent entirely clear. And translators then have to decide, should we translate and clarify the antecedent, even though the original language doesn't, or should we render it where it's unclear, as the original language does? That's a decision they have to make every time they encounter such a situation. Any rate, then Bezalel decorated the curtains with blue, purple, and scarlet thread with skillfully embroidered cherubim. All 10 curtains were exactly the same size, 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. And that's based on the belief that the cubit was 1.5 feet. 5 of these curtains were joined together to make one long curtain, and the other 5 were joined to make a second long curtain. So 5 times 6 is 30, and you got about 30 feet by 42 feet in the 2 curtains. And let's see, they've got a footnote there, B, for those measurements. It'll probably give us the actual cubits, yes. 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, which was quite long. But then you stop and figure, if you've got a tabernacle building that's 10 cubits high on either side and the whole thing then 10 cubits wide, 28 cubits would leave a cubit on either side hanging loose, short of reaching all the way to the ground, assuming that it was done that way. If it was done with a peak, as some artists draw it, then it would have been even higher along the sides. You'd have had that 28 cubits divided in half, 14 cubits on each side. The peak would probably be, well, I'd have to do the math on that. If you made it a 90-degree peak, you could calculate how high the peak would be. It would be 0.717 or 7.17 cubits high. So 14, yeah, it would cover it, but there'd be quite a room below the edges if they stretched it out that way. And
I was going to offer to do the math for you.
yeah, the one who buys 2 packages of 12 buns because one package won't be enough for 2 packs of 4 hot dogs each.
Well, 4 and 4 is 8,
Yeah.
and 2 packages, so 8 and 8 is 16. So
Yeah.
no, 12's not enough for 16.
Anyway.
No, I'll do the math for you if you'll teach me how first.
Don't have time right now. Okay, where did we leave off here? Okay. All right, we're ready. It looks like for we were reading verse 10. Five of these
And it was
curtains.
your fault I did that.
5 of these curtains were joined together to make one long curtain. The other 5 were joined to make a second long curtain. He made 50 loops of blue yarn and put them along the edge of the last curtain in each set. The 50 loops along the edge of one curtain matched the 50 loops along the edge of the other curtain. Then he made 50 gold clasps and fastened the long curtains together with the clasps. In this way the tabernacle was made of one continuous piece. He made 11 curtains of goat hair cloth to serve as a tent covering for the tabernacle. These 11 curtains were all exactly the same size, 45 feet long, 6 feet wide. Again, that's assuming that the cubit is 1.5 feet. Bezalel joined 5 of these curtains together to make one long curtain, and the other 6 were joined to make a second long curtain. He made 50 loops for the edge of each large curtain. He also made 50 bronze clasps to fasten the long curtains together. In this way the tent covering was made of one continuous piece. He completed the tent covering with a layer of tanned ram skins and a layer of fine goat skin leather. So they had the linen curtains embroidered that were the closest. That's what you would see from the inside. Then they had the goat hair cloth. Then they had ram skins and goat leather on top of that, which made it weatherproof. For the framework of the tabernacle, Bezalel constructed frames of acacia wood. Each frame was 15 feet high, 27 inches wide, or 10 cubits and I think 1.5 cubits there, with 2 pegs under each frame. All the frames were identical. He made 20 of these frames to support the curtains on the south side of the tabernacle. He also made 40 silver bases, 2 bases under each frame, with the pegs fitting securely into the bases. For the north side of the tabernacle, he made another 20 frames with their 40 silver bases, 2 bases under each frame. He made 6 frames for the rear, the west side of the tabernacle, along with 2 additional frames to reinforce the rear corners of the tabernacle. Now, 6 times 1.5 is 9. So that would have been a little bit short of the 10 cubits, but anyway. But then I think there were corner pieces that were made to fill up that. I think it'll mention that here. Let's see. along with 2 additional frames to reinforce the rear corners of the tabernacle. Yes, the 2 additional frames, the corner pieces. These corner frames were matched at the bottom and firmly attached at the top with a single ring, forming a single corner unit. Both of these corner units were made the same way. So there were 8 frames at the rear of the tabernacle, set in 16 silver bases, 2 bases under each frame. Then he made crossbars of acacia wood to link the frames, 5 crossbars for the north side of the tabernacle and 5 for the south side. He also made 5 crossbars for the rear of the tabernacle, which faced west. He made the middle crossbar to attach halfway up the frames. It ran all the way from one end of the tabernacle to the other. He overlaid the frames with gold and made gold rings to hold the crossbars. Then he overlaid the crossbars with gold as well. For the inside of the tabernacle, Bezalel made a special curtain of finely woven linen. He decorated it with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and with skillfully embroidered cherubim. For the curtain he made 4 posts of acacia wood and 4 gold hooks. He overlaid the posts with gold and set them in 4 silver bases. Then he made another curtain for the entrance to the sacred tent. He made it of finely woven linen and embroidered it with exquisite designs using blue, purple, and scarlet thread. It doesn't mention cherubim on those outer curtains, just on the inner curtains. This curtain was hung on gold hooks attached to 5 posts. The posts with their decorated tops and hooks were overlaid with gold, and the 5 bases were cast from bronze. So inside the bases were silver, outside for the opening to the actual sanctuary, the bases were cast from bronze. Continuing on, chapter 37. Next, Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood, a sacred chest 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, 27 inches high. And there's a footnote there that says that that's actually 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. We've kind of gone over this before. This is just essentially reiterating the design we've already read. He overlaid it inside and outside with pure gold, and he ran a molding of gold all around it. He cast 4 gold rings and attached them to its 4 feet, 2 rings on each side. Then he made poles from acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. He inserted the poles into the rings at the sides of the ark to carry it. Then he made the ark's cover, the place of atonement, from pure gold. It was 45 inches long, 27 inches wide. In other words, it matched the top of this chest. He made 2 cherubim from hammered gold and placed them on the 2 ends of the atonement cover. He molded the cherubim on each end of the atonement cover, making it all of 1 piece of gold. The cherubim faced each other and looked down on the atonement cover. With their wings spread above it, they protected it. Then Bezalel made the table of acacia wood, 36 inches long, 18 inches wide, 27 inches high. He overlaid it with pure gold and ran a gold molding around the edge. He decorated it with a 3-inch border all around, and he ran a gold molding along the border. Then he cast 4 gold rings for the table and attached them at the 4 corners next to the 4 legs. The rings were attached near the border to hold the poles that were used to carry the table. He made these poles from acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. Then he made special containers of pure gold for the table, bowls, ladles, jars, and pitchers to be used in pouring out liquid offerings. Next, Bezalel made the lampstand of pure hammered gold. He made the entire lampstand and its decorations of 1 piece: the base, center stem, lamp cups, buds, and petals. The lampstand had 6 branches going out from the center stem, 3 on each side. Each of the 6 branches had 3 lamp cups shaped like almond blossoms, complete with buds and petals. The center stem of the lampstand was crafted with 4 lamp cups shaped like almond blossoms, complete with buds and petals. There was an almond bud beneath each pair of branches, where the 6 branches extended from the center stem, all made of one piece. The almond buds and branches were all of one piece with the center stem, and they were hammered from pure gold. He also made 7 lamps for the lampstand, lamp snuffers and trays, all of pure gold. The entire lampstand, along with its accessories, was made from 75 pounds, or 1 talent, of pure gold. I'm pretty sure that's what footnote F will say, yes, 1 talent. Then Bezalel made the incense altar of acacia wood. It was 18 inches square, in other words, 1 cubit square, and 36 inches or 2 cubits high, with horns at the corners carved from the same piece of wood as the altar itself. He overlaid the top sides and horns of the altar with pure gold, and he ran a gold molding around the entire altar. He made 2 gold rings and attached them on opposite sides of the altar below the gold molding to hold the carrying poles. He made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. Then he made the sacred anointing oil and the fragrant incense, using the techniques of a skilled incense maker. And we just kind of read through that chapter because it doesn't really tell us anything new. We already know about the furniture and how it was to be made. That's essentially just telling it he made it as the instructions were, according to the instructions that had already been given and written out for us. So we go on, chapter 38. Next, Bezalel used acacia wood to construct the square altar of burnt offering. It was 7.5 feet wide, and I believe that's 5 cubits, yes. 5 cubits wide, 5 cubits long, 4.5 feet high. That would be 3 cubits high. He made horns for each of its 4 corners, so that the horns and altar were all one piece. He overlaid the altar with bronze. Then he made all the altar utensils of bronze, the ash buckets, shovels, basins, meat forks, and fire pans. Next, he made a bronze grating and installed it halfway down the side of the altar under the ledge. He cast 4 rings and attached them to the corners of the bronze grating to hold the carrying poles. He made the poles from acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze. He inserted the poles through the rings on the sides of the altar. The altar was hollow and was made from planks. And the grating would obviously hold whatever was placed on it up away from the ground, making room for oxygen to come in from the bottom and enhance the flames that would consume the offering, and then allowing the ash to drop on through. And I don't know, I think there might be a place where it even discusses ways to clean the ashes out from under the altar. At any rate, let's see, we've read through verse 7. The altar was hollow, was made from planks. Bezalel made the bronze wash basin and its bronze stand from bronze mirrors donated by the women who served at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then Bezalel made the courtyard, which was enclosed with curtains made of finely woven linen. On the south side, the curtains were 150 feet long. They were held up by 20 posts set securely in 20 bronze bases. He hung the curtains with silver hooks and rings. He made a similar set of curtains for the north side, 150 feet of curtains held up by 20 posts set securely in bronze bases. He hung the curtains with silver hooks and rings. The curtains on the west end of the courtyard were 75 feet long, hung with silver hooks and rings, and supported by 10 posts set into 10 bases. The east end, the front, was also 75 feet long. The courtyard entrance was on the east end, flanked by 2 curtains. The curtain on the right side was 22.5 feet long and was supported by 3 posts set into 3 bases. The curtain on the left side was also 22.5 feet long and was supported by 3 posts set into 3 bases. So you add that up, now you've got 45 feet out, out of the 75 feet. So that leaves 30 feet or 15 feet on each side for the part that wasn't entrance. All the curtains used in the courtyard were made of finely woven linen. Each post had a bronze base, and all the hooks and rings were silver. The tops of the posts of the courtyard were overlaid with silver, and the rings to hold up the curtains were made of silver. He made the curtain for the entrance to the courtyard of finely woven linen, and he decorated it with beautiful embroidery in blue, purple, and scarlet thread. It was 30 feet long, and its height was 7.5 feet. So it's the opening that's 30 feet compared to the 45 feet of curtain on either side before you get to the opening. I think I just had it backwards. Anyway, he embroidered it, but it doesn't say that he put cherubim in it, just that he decorated it with this embroidery. Its height was 7.5 feet, or in other words, it would be 5 cubits. Just like the curtains of the courtyard walls, it was supported by 4 posts, each set securely in its own bronze base. The tops of the posts were overlaid with silver, and the hooks and rings were also made of silver. All the tent pegs used in the tabernacle and courtyard were made of bronze. This is an inventory of the materials used in building the tabernacle of the covenant. The Levites compiled the figures as Moses directed, and Ithamar, son of Aaron, the priest, served as recorder. Bezalel, son of Uri, grandson of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He was assisted by Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, a craftsman expert at engraving, designing, and embroidering with blue, purple, and scarlet thread on fine linen cloth. The people brought special offerings of gold totaling 2,193 pounds as measured by the weight of the sanctuary shekel. This gold was used throughout the tabernacle. 2,193 pounds, divide that by 73. Let's go down and look. 29 talents and 730 shekels, or about 994 kilograms. Each shekel weighed about 4/10 of an ounce, or 11 grams. So that's the amount of gold. The whole community of Israel gave 7,545 pounds of silver, and they're saying that's 1,000 talents, as measured by the weight of the sanctuary shekel. This silver came from the tax collected from each man registered in the census. The tax is 1 bekah, which is half a shekel, based on the sanctuary shekel. The tax was collected from 603,550 men who had reached their 20th birthday. The 100 bases for the frames of the sanctuary walls and for the posts supporting the inner curtain required 7,500 pounds of silver, about 75 pounds for each base. The remaining 45 pounds of silver was used to make the hooks and rings to overlay the tops of the posts. The people also brought as special offerings 5,310 pounds of bronze, which was used for casting the bases for the posts at the entrance to the tabernacle, and for the bronze altar with its bronze grating and all its altar utensils. Bronze was also used to make the bases for the posts that supported the curtains around the courtyard, the bases for the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard, and all the tent pegs for the tabernacle and the courtyard. And again, we're just kind of reading through it because it's pretty much boilerplate repetition of what we've already read about the design of this portable worship structure. So we move on to chapter 39. The craftsmen all made beautiful sacred garments of blue, purple, and scarlet cloth, clothing for Aaron to wear while ministering in the holy place, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Bezalel, or he, I'm sure is what that footnote's going to tell us, made the ephod of finely woven linen and embroidered it with gold and with blue, purple, and scarlet thread. He made gold thread by hammering out thin sheets of gold and cutting it into fine strands. With great skill and care, he worked it into the fine linen with the blue, purple, and scarlet thread. The ephod consisted of two pieces, front and back, joined at the shoulders with two shoulder pieces. It was kind of like a piece of armor that you would strap over your shoulders. There were straps to hold it, and then there was a part in front and a part in the back, and that was the ephod. The decorative sash was made of the same materials, finely woven linen embroidered with gold and with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. They mounted the two onyx stones in settings of gold filigree. The stones were engraved with the names of the tribes of Israel, just as a seal is engraved. He fastened these stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as a reminder that the priest represents the people of Israel. All this was done just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Bezalel made the chest piece with great skill and care. He made it to match the ephod, using finely woven linen embroidered with gold and with blue, purple, and scarlet thread. He made the chest piece of a single piece of cloth folded to form a pouch 9 inches square. And that would be a hand's breadth or a span square. See, footnote B probably says, one span, or about 23 centimeters. And I skipped a section there. I went up too high. They mounted 4 rows of gemstones on it. The first row contained a red carnelian, a pale green peridot, and an emerald. The second row contained a turquoise, a blue lapis lazuli, and a white moonstone. The third row contained an orange jacinth, an agate, and a purple amethyst. The fourth row contained a blue-green beryl, an onyx, and a green jasper. All these stones were set in gold filigree. Each stone represented one of the 12 sons of Israel, and the name of that tribe was engraved on it like a seal. And it doesn't tell us which stone represented which tribe. It just tells us that each stone did have the name of a tribe engraved on it. Now I'm going to the book of Revelation because there it describes the 12 foundations. And the 12 foundations also have the names of the tribes on them. And let's see where that description is given. Because I wanted to look at the names, yes. So that will be in Revelation 21, starting at verse 18. The wall was made of jasper and the city of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundations of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. Now I'm looking because I'm okay. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. It was on the gates that were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the tribes were not written on matching stones in the foundation in Revelation. And I don't know if that's because John got a little confused, remembering that the stones had the names of the tribes in the priestly garments, or if he did that intentionally, just to throw us off, make us ask questions, make us think maybe. Anyway. So a lot of the same stones are mentioned, but probably it's not a one-for-one connection. Although you're dealing with two different languages. Revelation would have been written in Greek, whereas this is in Hebrew. So since the exact identification of the stones isn't perfectly clear nowadays, it's possible that John rendered his list from the Septuagint reading of the Old Testament here, and that in fact he did intend a one-to-one correspondence in the different gems that are being named. To attach the chest piece to the ephod, they made braided cords of pure gold thread. They also made 2 settings of gold filigree and 2 gold rings and attached them to the top corners of the chest piece. They tied the 2 gold cords to the rings on the chest piece. They tied the other ends of the cords to the gold settings on the shoulder pieces of the ephod. Then they made 2 more gold rings and attached them to the inside edges of the chest piece next to the ephod. Below the shoulder pieces, just above the knot where the decorative sash was fastened to the ephod. They attached the bottom rings of the chest piece to the rings on the ephod with blue cords. In this way, the chest piece was held securely to the ephod above the decorative sash. All this was done just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So it was fastened top and bottom so it wouldn't swing out if the priest should bend over. Is this boring, Renee? It might be. I think she might be asleep. Not surprised, really. Additional clothing for the priest. Bezalel made the robe that is worn with the ephod from a single piece of blue woven cloth, with an opening for Aaron's head in the middle of it. The opening was reinforced with a woven collar so that it would not tear. Footnote C, identification of some of these gemstones. Footnote D, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. We render it collar because that makes sense in the context, not because we know for sure what the Hebrew meant. They made pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and attached them to the hem of the robe. They also made bells of pure gold and placed them between the pomegranates along the hem of the robe, with bells and pomegranates alternating all around the hem. The robe was to be worn whenever the priest ministered before the Lord, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And the supposition is made that that arrangement meant that as the priest moved along, the bells would tinkle as they were rung by the adjoining pomegranates, although they're cloth pomegranates. I'm not sure how loud they'd make a noise, but the idea was that as long as the priest is moving, you'd hear the bells. And based on what's going to happen in the next book, that when the high priest went in to minister before the Lord on the Day of Atonement, they would listen for those bells. And if they quit ringing, they would know something had happened. And they would use staves, we're told, to pull him out. Not that that ever apparently happened. I don't know that we have any record of it, but that's kind of the supposition that gets made anyway. They made tunics for Aaron and his sons from fine linen cloth. The turban and the special head coverings were made of fine linen, and the undergarments were also made of finely woven linen. The sashes were made of finely woven linen and embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Finally, they made the sacred medallion, the badge of holiness, of pure gold. They engraved it like a seal with these words, "Holy to the Lord." They attached the medallion with a blue cord to Aaron's turban, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So that phrase is being repeated. They did it just like God told Moses to do it. And so at last the tabernacle was finished. The Israelites had done everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they brought the entire tabernacle to Moses. The sacred tent with all its furnishings, clasp frames, crossbars, posts, and bases. The tent coverings of tan ram skins and fine goatskin leather. The inner curtain to shield the Ark of the Covenant and its carrying poles, the Ark's cover, the place of atonement, the table and all its utensils, the bread of the presence, the pure gold lampstand with its symmetrical lamp cups, all its accessories, and the olive oil for lighting, the gold altar, the anointing oil and fragrant incense, the curtain for the entrance of the sacred tent, the bronze altar, the bronze grating and its carrying poles and utensils, the wash basin with its stand, the curtains for the walls of the courtyard, the posts and their bases, the curtain for the entrance to the courtyard, entrance rather than walls, the ropes and tent pegs, all the furnishings to be used in worship at the tabernacle, the beautifully stitched garments for the priests to wear while ministering in the holy place, the sacred garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments for his sons to wear as they minister as priests. So the people of Israel followed all of the Lord's instructions to Moses. Then Moses inspected all their work. When he found it had been done just as the Lord had commanded him, he blessed them. So, and here in verse 32, which was up there as we were beginning that section, that list, the footnote notes that the Hebrew says the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, which suggests, as I think, that the tent of meeting was something that Moses was using, but once this was built and ready to use, then it replaced that one structure and became the tent of meeting. And then, of course, the Ark of the Testimony, which was, they're calling it the Ark of the Covenant here. And that may be based largely on tradition. And it looks like we'll have time to finish this book because we're up to chapter 40. We've just been reading through because, like I said, there wasn't really anything new there. It's not like we were really learning anything. It's just informing us in considerable detail that the people made it according to the instructions that Moses passed on to them as he had received them on the mountain. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Set up the tabernacle on the first day of the new year." So the first day of the new year would be 1 year after they had fled Egypt. Place the Ark of the Covenant inside, again, Ark of the Testimony, and install the inner curtain to enclose the Ark within the most holy place. Then bring in the table and arrange the utensils on it, and bring in the lampstand and set up the lamps. Place the gold incense altar in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Then hang the curtain at the entrance of the tabernacle. Now that suggests that maybe Hebrews was right to place that gold incense altar in the most holy place rather than in the holy place as is traditionally imagined. And that transition, that change may have taken place in the events that we're about to read in the next book, which we won't get to for a little bit. Place the altar of burnt offering in front of the tabernacle entrance. Set the wash basin between the tabernacle and the altar and fill it with water. Then set up the courtyard around the outside of the tent and hang the curtain for the courtyard entrance. Take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all its furnishings to consecrate them and make them holy. Anoint the altar of burnt offering and its utensils to consecrate them. An ad popped up and covered up what I was reading. And make them holy. Present Aaron and his sons at the entrance of the tabernacle and wash them with water. Dress Aaron with the sacred garments and anoint him, consecrating him to serve me as a priest. Then present his sons and dress them in their tunics. Anoint them as you did their father, so they may also serve me as priests. With their anointing, Aaron's descendants are set apart from the priesthood, for the priesthood, forever, from generation to generation. And that remained true, possibly clear up until the days of Jesus, that the Jews, who had a fascination with genealogy anyway, kept track of who was descended from Aaron and who therefore was eligible to serve as priests. And we do know that there was a change in the lineage in the time of David, that because of what happened when Eli refused to depose his sons for fear that he would end his lineage as a father of the priests, he ended up getting cut out because the descendants of his who did serve as priests eventually were driven from their office. Back in the, I think that even went into Solomon's time, that Solomon finished putting an end to the line of Eli. But the ones who replaced Eli were also descended from Aaron, so that this held true, even though the direct line of succession was interrupted at that point. And we can talk about when we get there and actually read who did what where and who was whose son and so on and so forth when we get into the books of Samuel. Present Aaron and his sons at the entrance of the tabernacle and wash them with water. Dress Aaron with the sacred garments and anoint him, consecrating him to serve me as priest. Now, I think I already read that, didn't I? Moses proceeded to do everything just as the Lord had commanded him. So the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year. Moses erected the tabernacle by setting down its bases, inserting the frames, attaching the crossbars, and setting up the posts. Then he spread the coverings over the tabernacle framework and put on the protective layers, just as the Lord had commanded him. You know, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, you know, I used to make the font size larger, and apparently that's slipped out. That should be a little easier for you people to read, and it looks better for me too. It looks more like what I'm used to. I don't know how long it's been messed up like that. Sorry about that. So we were reading 12 through 15 there about setting the priests apart. So now it says, verse 16, Moses proceeded to do everything just as the Lord had commanded him. So the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year. Moses erected the tabernacle by setting down its bases, inserting the frames, attaching crossbars, and setting up the posts. Then he spread the coverings over the tabernacle framework and put on the protective layers, just as the Lord had commanded him. He took the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant, or the Ten Commandments, and placed them inside the ark. Footnote E. He placed the testimony, see the note on 25 verse 16, inside the ark of the covenant. Then he attached the carrying poles to the ark, and he set the ark's cover, the place of atonement, on top of it. Then he brought the ark of the covenant into the tabernacle and hung the inner curtain to shield it from view, just as the Lord had commanded him. Next, Moses placed the table in the tabernacle along the north side of the holy place, just outside the inner curtain. And he arranged the bread of the presence on the table before the Lord, just as the Lord had commanded him. He set the lampstand in the tabernacle across from the table on the south side of the holy place. Then he lit the lamps in the Lord's presence, just as the Lord had commanded him. He also placed the gold incense altar in the tabernacle, in the holy place, in front of the inner curtain. So here, already now, we see it being placed in the holy place in front of the curtain, instead of in the most holy place, as was hinted at earlier. Interesting. On it he burned the fragrant incense, just as the Lord had commanded him. He hung the curtain at the entrance of the tabernacle, and he placed the altar of burnt offering near the tabernacle entrance. Then he offered a burnt offering and a grain offering, just as the Lord had commanded him. Now, placing it near the tabernacle entrance suggests that it wasn't at the center of the eastern half of the overall courtyard, as some have suggested, but it was still the focal point in that section, even if it wasn't physically in the center. Next, Moses placed the wash basin between the tabernacle and the altar. He filled it with water so the priests could wash themselves. Moses and Aaron's sons used water from it to wash their hands and feet. Whenever they approached the altar and entered the tabernacle, they washed themselves just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then he hung the curtains forming the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar, and he set up the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard. So at last Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could no longer enter the tabernacle because the cloud had settled down over it and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. He's the one who came the closest to seeing God. He didn't see him face to face, but he came the closest to seeing him. And even Moses couldn't show up there. So we're dealing with this presence now entering the tabernacle. Now, whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out on their journey, following it. But if the cloud did not rise, they remained where they were until it lifted. The cloud of the Lord hovered over the tabernacle during the day, and at night fire glowed inside the cloud, so the whole family of Israel could see it. This continued throughout all their journeys. And that is the end of the book of Exodus. Kind of didn't end with much of a bang, did it? But we do have that instance right there at the end. And for that reason, I want to go now to the book of Ezekiel. We have a few minutes here. I think we can do this. So let's scroll down here and find Ezekiel. And then let's go to chapter 10. I can tell by the title. Now this is Ezekiel, who sees the presence of God, describes it in probably more detail than any other of the biblical prophets. He talks about the wheels and the wheels intersecting wheels and the beasts with the different faces and how they didn't turn when they went. They just went straight in whatever direction, but they didn't have to turn because they faced all of those directions, so on and so forth. This kind of description, and then in the previous chapters, if you look at the list, he gets that vision of idolatry on the temple grounds. And then, chapter 9, he gets the vision of the sealing and of the destruction that then followed to deal with those who had not been sealed. And there were a number of men given the task first of marking the saints and then of killing all who didn't have the mark. In my vision, I saw what appeared to be a throne of blue lapis lazuli above the crystal surface over the heads of the cherubim. And this could well be the blue stone pavement that the Israelites saw in chapter 24 of Exodus. Then the Lord spoke to the man in linen clothing and said, "Go between the whirling wheels beneath the cherubim and take a handful of burning coals and scatter them over the city." He did this as I watched. The cherubim were standing in the south end of the temple when the man went in, and the cloud of glory filled the inner courtyard. Then the glory of the Lord rose up from above the cherubim and went over to the entrance of the temple. The temple was filled with this cloud of glory, just like it was, as we read here in the book of Exodus, when it entered. The temple was filled with this cloud of glory, and the courtyard glowed brightly with the glory of the Lord. The moving wings of the cherubim sounded like the voice of God Almighty, and could be heard even in the outer courtyard. The Lord said to the man in linen clothing, "Go between the cherubim and take some burning coals from between the wheels." So the man went in and stood beside one of the wheels. Then one of the cherubim reached out his hand and took some live coals from the fire burning among them. He put the coals into the hands of the man in linen clothing, and the man took them and went out. All the cherubim had what looked like human hands under their wings. I looked, and each of the 4 cherubim had a wheel beside him, and the wheels sparkled like beryl. All 4 wheels looked alike and were made the same. Each wheel had a second wheel turning crosswise within it. The cherubim could move in any of the 4 directions they faced without turning as they moved. So this is, again, very similar to the description that we read in Ezekiel chapter 1. They went straight in the direction they faced, never turning aside. Both the cherubim and the wheels were covered with eyes. The cherubim had eyes all over their bodies, including their hands, their backs, their wings. I heard someone refer to the wheels as the whirling wheels. Each of the 4 cherubim had 4 faces. The first was the face of an ox, the second was a human face, the third was the face of a lion, and the fourth was the face of an eagle. And there's a footnote in that, the face of a cherub, as opposed to an ox. The Hebrew says the face of a cherub. Okay, interesting that they would say ox there, but perhaps cherub and ox were similar. I'm not really that up on that. So there were the 4 faces, and again, that's straight out of chapter 1. Then the cherubim rose upward. These were the same living beings I had seen between the Kibar River. When the cherubim moved, the wheels moved with them. When they lifted their wings to fly, the wheels stayed beside them. When the cherubim stopped, the wheels stopped. When they flew upward, the wheels rose up, for the spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Then the glory of the Lord moved out from the entrance of the temple and hovered above the cherubim. And as I watched, the cherubim flew with their wheels to the east gate of the Lord's temple. And the glory of the God of Israel hovered above them. These were the same living beings I had seen beneath the God of Israel. When I was by the Kibar River. I knew they were cherubim, for each had 4 faces and 4 wings, and what looked like human hands under their wings. And their faces were just like the faces of the beings I had seen at the Kibar, and they traveled straight ahead just as the others had. Now, this is titled in this version, the Lord's glory leaves the temple. Ezekiel is seeing this, and it does sound like, I wanted to go on and see if it said anything more about it in chapter 11. Well, it's going to go on and talk about specific people and so forth. But you kind of see here the reverse of what we saw in Exodus. In Exodus, the glory of God appears and takes up its place, so we understand, over that mercy seat, or that, I forget what they call it in this version, between the cherubim, and stayed there until this point in the book of Ezekiel, when God's glory leaves and departs. And as far as we know, now that was a prophetic vision. So Ezekiel wasn't actually at the temple in Jerusalem to see it happen. But it was an illustration, I think, in terms that Ezekiel and his readers could understand that the glory of God had abandoned that. Now, in chapter 43, you'll see that the title says there, "The Lord's glory returns." And this is in Ezekiel's description of Israel and Jerusalem after the captivity, after the restoration. After this, the man brought me back around to the east gateway. He's described the temple and given all these measurements. Suddenly, the glory of the God of Israel appeared from the east. The sound of his coming was like the roar of rushing waters, and the whole landscape shone with his glory. This vision was just like the others I had seen, first by the Kibar River, and then when he came to destroy Jerusalem. I fell face down on the ground, and the glory of the Lord came into the temple through the east gateway. Then the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner courtyard, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple, and I heard someone speaking with me from within the temple, while the man who had been measuring stood beside me. The Lord said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place where I will rest my feet. I will live here forever among the people of Israel. They and their kings will not defile my holy name any longer by their adulterous worship of other gods, or by honoring the relics of their kings who have died. They put their idol altars right next to mine, with only a wall between them and me. They defiled my holy name by such detestable sins, so I consumed them in my anger. Now let them stop worshiping other gods and honoring the relics of their kings, and I will live among them forever. So it describes the glory of God in this chapter returning to the temple. But again, this is long before the temple was restored, and we have no record that the Shekinah glory ever again parked over the Ark of the Covenant. And some people claim that the Ark of the Covenant was either destroyed or hidden in the days at the beginning of the captivity. Some suggest that Jeremiah had it buried under the temple, and if we could dig under the temple, we could find it, blah, blah, blah. I seriously doubt that. But the ark apparently was not put back. And one of the points that gets made about what happened when Jesus died was that the veil in the temple was torn open, revealing that neither the ark nor the Shekinah glory was inside there. Only the priests who went in there once a year would have known that. They could have kept it hidden until then. And perhaps that could be understood symbolically. When Jesus died, he laid bare the lies of Satan, but he also laid bare the lies of false religion. Anyway. And so we've gone on long enough, and we can begin the book of Leviticus next week. Again, we do have a sermon presentation planned for tomorrow. We are going to plan for that, post it, and hope that it is available by 11 o'clock Central Time. We'll see how that works out, but that's the plan. You know, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, as they say. And then again, next week, you can join us. We'll get into Leviticus, and we'll look at all the sacrifices and how they were handled. And there might be some interesting things in there when we look at which offerings did what things and how they were handled. But at any rate, until next week, then, we say goodbye and God bless.